for Wednesday morning, January 24th. Hope everybody got in safely this morning. This morning, we're going to be focusing on some of the testimony that we were anticipating getting at the first day of the session, but our time got cut short. So the focus of this morning is climate resiliency and the approaches and programs that are both within the Agency of Natural Resources and the Agency of Transportation. And really kind of our goal, I think, this morning is to really understand there are a lot of different programs that exist within state government. And, in light of the recent flooding that our communities across Vermont have been experiencing, I think it's helpful for our committee to understand where our communities can go for technical support and grant support, et cetera, as we try to, puzzle our way through this. So I think starting this morning with Marion Waltz, who's here from the Agency of Natural Resources, to inform our committee about the work that you do. So welcome, Marion.
Great, thanks for having me. Can I get my slides for you?
Okay, maybe.
And
are you plugged in?
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh. Okay, let's try. Sometimes unplugging and then plugging back in is because we did see them up just a moment ago. Oh my.
I can also join the Zoom if that's better. The Zoom link.
Let's see. I think if it's so strange. We do these tech setups and you had your slides on the screen.
They were just up
down. Yeah. So
let me see if I can drag them over perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think you're on this. So know what I think it's clearly a tech thing on our end. So Jeannie, could you send Marion the Zoom link?
I do not. I don't think Emma sent it to me.
Gives everybody an opportunity to have a sip of their coffee.
Yeah.
So
take a breath.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to make sure. So with Andrea, we were thinking, does it make sense for our order for Marion to go and then Stephanie and then you?
I think that makes sense.
Okay, terrific. So we'll do that then.
Jeannie, Stephanie just sent me the Zoom link, so I'm getting in there now. So
great.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Teamwork is doing work at these days.
Easy to have folks. Great.
That's a good sign. I think we hear you join. I see on my screen. Yeah, it's just taking a while. This thing, maybe it's the
There we go.
So I think the only thing that you'll probably need to do differently is just mute your.
Yeah, I didn't join with audio, so it should be good to go. All right, let me pull my screen up here for you all. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
And then you might just, there you go. Perfect.
good to go? Great.
Thank you for working with us.
No problem.
Technology.
Well, thanks everyone for having us back today. My name is Marion Walls. I'm the Resilience and Adaptation Coordinator at the ANR's Climate Action Office. Here to share with you today some of the work that the Climate Action Office is doing to increase resilience to climate change impacts in our communities, and to really follow up on the previous testimony you all had at one of the first hearings this session. So as you all are well aware, and we'll start sort of from the beginning, as the Climate Action Office is a newer entity within ANR, the Global Warming Solutions Act that was enacted in September of 2020 established the Vermont Climate Council and charged it with writing a climate action plan that, among other requirements, must identify strategies that build resilience to prepare the state's communities, infrastructure, and economy to adapt to the current and anticipated effects of climate change. The Climate Action Plan was adopted in December of 2021 and includes recommendations to not only reduce emissions, but also build resilience and adaptation and sequester carbon. The Climate Action Plan also included a recommendation to establish a body within the executive branch to ensure coordinated climate action across state government. So about 6 months after the Climate Action Plan was adopted, a Climate Action Office was established within the FY23 budget, charged with working collaboratively within and outside ANR on a state climate vision and to lead, coordinate, and track climate action. In the Climate Action Office, we have staff with expertise in greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation and resilience, carbon sequestration, communications, and data analysis. We're setting up systems to track and monitor climate work across state agencies, and happy to speak to that in more detail. We're focusing on ensuring public access to and understanding of climate action through both our work and community engagement, as well as our support of the Vermont Climate Council. And we also work closely with the Environmental Justice Unit at the Agency of Natural Resources, which supports the implementation of Act 154. As we know, frontline and impacted communities will be the first to feel the impacts of climate change and should be really centered in all of this work. As the Climate Action Office was established within ANR, but really intended to support a statewide vision for climate action, an interagency advisory board was established to provide a space for proactive coordination on climate work across state government. That advisory board includes representation from the Public Service Department, Agency of Transportation through Andrea, Agency of Natural Resources, Vermont Emergency Management through Stephanie, Agency of Agriculture, Buildings and General Services, Human Services, Commerce and Community Development, as well as the Vermont State Climatologist, Dr. Dupini Drew, who you heard from the previous testimony. So specific to the resilience and adaptation work in the Climate Action Office that I lead, I'll be sharing both some of the ongoing work that we've been focused on over the last year and a half, as well as planned work that we see coming up. We have a lot on our horizon in terms of coordination and leading efforts in climate resilience that has both taken shape after the flooding of July and really was established as the Climate Action Office was coming into fruition, and we see really supporting that work moving forward. I'll speak to some of the technical analysis and tools we'll be focusing on in just a moment. In the strategy and program development space, we're focused on resilience strategies and supporting programs really through partnership and work across state agencies and government on incorporating a climate resilience lens into existing work. A few examples of that, we, through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, partnered with them to add additional funds to their designation, evaluation, and reform study that's really looking at the ACCD designation programs to add capacity to really dig deep into how climate resilience can be supported through ACCD's designation program. It was part of their initial contract, but after the flooding, we noted and had conversations with ACCD that needed to be a bigger focus and had additional funds that we could give to that work. That report will be finalized in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be excited to share those recommendations with you all soon, later in January. As I noted earlier, we're building a tool to measure and track climate action. Building that includes establishing metrics to track climate resilience. And we're doing that process through a partnership with folks like Vermont Emergency Management, the Public Service Department, the Agency of Transportation, and DEC as well. We're doing that to ensure that we both know what we can track through partnerships with those organizations who perhaps track metrics or have data available to them through their grant programs, and also ensure that we know that we can build this tool to long-term think about what we should be tracking to better understand the outcomes and impacts of our work on building climate resilience. We're also coordinating very closely with Stephanie and her team at Vermont Emergency Management on how the Climate Action Plan and the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, which I think you'll hear about in a moment, can better iterate off each other when it comes to climate resilience and climate action, with the goal of articulating a broader state vision for resilience and really understanding the actions that are needed to implement that vision across these multiple planning efforts. So again, the Climate Action Plan has a focus on climate resilience, as does the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And so ensuring that we're coordinating closely as those plans are updated and revised so that those actions are iterating off each other. We're not duplicating work with stakeholders, but rather building off those efforts of those multiple plans.
And Mary, just because this ANR's world is not the world of this committee.
Sure.
Just the State Hazard Mitigation Plan has a focus on climate resiliency, and that's under emergency management.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we're understanding the different parties that are coordinating.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah. So, and I think Stephanie will speak to it in her presentation, but the State Hazard Mitigation Plan is written and sort of through Vermont Emergency Management, through Stephanie's team, the hazard mitigation folks at VEM. Both of those plans, both the Climate Action Plan that the council was charged with and ANR supports the development of, as well as the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, are really multi-stakeholder plans. So they're not just plans written and implemented by one particular agency. Rather, they're multi-stakeholder planning efforts that both include state agencies and folks outside state government. And both have a focus on climate adaptation and really understanding both the risks that hazards pose to Vermont communities, exposure, and what steps can be taken to harden infrastructure, incorporate nature-based solutions, think about economic development impacts, and broader sort of community planning work. So again, there's some, and we've been working on, I don't have it ready to share with you all today, but sort of a Venn diagram that shows the overlap of concepts and focus of both the State Hazard Mitigation Plan and the Climate Action Plan, where they are the same and where they differ too. And there is some, different language in the Global Warming Solutions Act about what the CAP should focus on. There's a particular focus on climate financing in the Climate Action Plan, or the language in the GWSA in that space. So there are some differences in the two plans, and we're coordinating closely to ensure that they're not duplicative. We're building off that work with the various stakeholder groups. It's a small state, so we have a lot of folks involved in the same processes.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to dive in more if you have questions about sort of who's involved and jurisdiction there. You all have recently have seen an announcement from the governor and the treasurer's office to develop a resilience implementation strategy. It's a recent announcement that came out at the beginning of January. The Climate Action Office is partnering in that effort with the treasurer's office and the governor's office. We met just a week and a half ago to really think about the framework to develop that strategy, building off a lot of work that's already underway or planned at the Climate Action Office. And at a high level, that strategy is really looking at, as I just alluded to, we have a lot of existing work and sort of plans through the Climate Action Plan and the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, work from the Agency of Transportation and other partners that does already focus on climate resilience. And this resilience implementation strategy is really intended to pull that work together, look at where there's overlaps and we're meeting particular goals, where there might be gaps as well, and develop a strategy to meet those gaps. And so this initiative is just starting, but looking forward to working and partnering with the Treasurer's Office and the Governor's Office on moving that forward and sharing more details with you all once we have the work plan for that figured out. And then in the communication space, I'll just speak sort of broadly, the Climate Action Office, we have someone who's focused on communications and community engagement work. And we really work to support climate action communications, both through ANR and through our partners with the Interagency Advisory Board, thinking a lot about how we communicate out the results of the tracking that we're charged with doing, as well as program coordination with various partners and audiences in mind. So I'll take a step back here, and I think you heard a lot about this from Dr. Dupigny-Giroux when you had your joint session a couple of weeks ago, and heard from ANR colleagues really about their response to the July flooding, and I think some of the December flooding as well. So I won't speak to that too much, and will note that the Climate Action Office isn't really involved in disaster response. That's not our role. But we'll note that events from the summer, not just the flooding, but the early droughts that we felt, poor air quality due to wildfires, frosts following unseasonably warm winter weather, and then the flooding from the summer and winter all really heighten the importance and urgency of this cross-sector and cross-agency coordination on support to communities and the people who are feeling the impacts every day. In conversations that we've been having through the Climate Action Office on tools that I'll get to in just a moment, what we've been hearing as needed support is really all the more urgent following the events of the summer and what we know will be experiencing into the future. So again, we weren't involved in immediate flood response or recovery, and that short-term recovery lasted through September, and conversations still continue about that. But through our office and our work with the Interagency Advisory Board, we do play a role in coordinating the efforts to think about how we can enhance resilience to disasters, how our existing programs can better support each other. And we also played a role in really thinking about coordinated messaging after the flooding to the congressional delegation and others about climate resilience needs. So moving into tool development, much of my focus over the last year has been to develop tools intended to help communities build climate resilience into their day-to-day lexicon for municipal planning and project implementation. So it's really much easier, or we hope easier, for communities across the state to think about how they can build climate adaptation into their day-to-day work. So I have a one slide each for two tools or resources we've been working on. Would welcome, I think, separate conversations about these as we can dive into more detail, because I want to really remain at a high level today with respect to time. So the first that we've been working on and hope to roll out later this spring is something called the Municipal Climate Toolkit. This was a key recommendation that came from the Global Warming Solutions Act requirement that required the council to recommend tools for municipalities to assess their climate resilience. ANR is developing this tool in partnership with a task group made up of folks from the Climate Council. So really working in partnership with the Climate Council to develop this resource. The goal of the toolkit is to provide a centralized hub for information relevant for designing and implementing climate action measures or strategies, as well as information on financial resources and technical assistance providers that we could connect to municipalities. We're intending it to be a one-stop or maybe two-stop shop for municipalities looking to incorporate climate change into their municipal planning and processes. Currently, there's a lot of tools and resources that already exist and technical assistance providers across state government that really pull in or speak to either as a primary or a co-benefit climate resilience, how that ties into your day-to-day transportation work with road foremen, how we think about climate resilience in the context of our agricultural community and food insecurity. But there's no one place where you can kind of filter through and look at those resources through one lens. And so that's what we intend the toolkit to be.
So it's not really just about a town plan, like it's really about it's the much more detail, like the level.
Right. Yes. And we're not developing, at this point, we're developing the toolkit to really be a landing page to connect to existing resources. I think as the Climate Action Office and other agencies within state government develop new tools, those will be linked in the toolkit. But the way we're thinking about it is, as a municipality or say that you're a select board member or someone thinking about climate change, there's various ways that you might find yourself in these conversations. You could just be interested in learning about the impacts of climate change on your community, or you could be interested as a planning commission in really understanding how climate change might impact your municipal government or your municipal budget or impact your road system. So there might be resources out there that can really just help you learn. That could be access to climate data and modeling. It could be access to one-pagers that talk about climate impacts, resources from the National Climate Assessment that was recently released. So there's sort of that learning phase. The next phase we sort of think of in relation to this toolkit is planning or acting. So you might, moving from sort of your learning phase, be thinking about, okay, we need to develop or update our local hazard mitigation plan and want to ensure that we're incorporating climate change into that conversation. Or we're thinking about doing capital planning and want to think about the impact of climate change on our capital projects and really thinking through what the impacts may be and the potential repercussions in our community, as an example. So we'd like to include resources where we have them to help folks really think about incorporation of climate planning of climate change into their planning work. And then there's really the implementation phase. So once you have those plans, how do we actually implement them? How do we use the toolkit to connect folks to technical assistance providers across state government with RPCs, and also ensure that we have an updated list of financial resources available. So that's the idea with the toolkit, is to really provide a landing page and a lens for folks to see existing work through climate change impacts. And you can see just a mock-up on the screen here. Again, at a most basic level, it will be a list of resources, but filtered in a way and with some landing pages that sort of walk folks through climate change impacts and sort of how we're thinking about it in terms of natural environment, built environment, people and communities and others, as well as a way to be able to filter resources by the types you see up on this screen here. So planning resources, data resources, resources to help you think about education and outreach, case studies, so you can see maybe what communities around you are doing, and then financial and technical assistance provider resources as well.
All right, I think we have a question here.
Sure. So is this available now?
It's not yet available. We're still looking at building it.
When?
We're hoping later this spring.
Okay.
We're working through an IT contract to get some details on it. So it's a little bit
As a
of
26-year local municipal official,
Mhm.
I think stuff gets done at the local level much more quickly
Mhm.
than it does here at the state. So I am very happy to see this.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, and we'll be happy to share it with you once we have more of a mock-up. And I've been working on this sort of since the Climate Action Office was formed. Have done stakeholder engagement with municipal officials, with RPCs, with these technical assistance providers broadly are our partners within state government who really are those contacts for municipalities to implement state programs. And so have done quite a bit of stakeholder engagement to get feedback about how to make this a usable resource. It's tough. I mean, we're trying to balance having it be a simple tool and not an extensive list of resources, but also something that a municipality who's really just trying to learn about climate change versus, hearing from Burlingtons and South Burlingtons who already have climate action plans and are really thinking about regulatory and non-regulatory tools should they be implementing. It's a wide range there. So we're trying to balance that.
Great, so see another, oh, sorry, are you all set? No, sorry, Representative Couch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I assume you'll have a big communication piece to this to train people how to use
Yes.
it and any idea what that's gonna look like?
That's a good question. I think the other tool that I'll show you all in my next slide here is more of a mapping tool intended to help municipalities kind of explore climate hazards within their community. And for that particular tool, we have funds and are going to be partnering with regional planning commissions to do outreach to help us develop sort of guides and resources for communities to see that tool and how it might be used in their planning processes. So I would envision something similar to that with this rollout.
Yeah, and just a follow-up. So I would hope that the communication goes down to even community members, because in our town, certain community members drive a lot of
Right.
these sort of actions.
Right.
And the select board, or, they have just normal business to do and they may not,
Right.
it may not go to this depth.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think in some of the stakeholder engagement we did with this, partnered with VLCT to ensure that we're sort of getting on their lists to share just the webinars and conversations we were having. And you're right, I think reaching beyond to really the champions and leaders,
Right,
because you
yeah.
might just have one person in the community who's really driving. We have someone who's on our task group. That's the group of folks from the council who's helping work with me on this, who lives in Wheelock, and she's really the one champion that has gotten their local hazard mitigation plan adopted, and is really that one individual, and says a lot that it's one volunteer who often drives this work. So understood.
So I know there are questions. I want to let Marion get through her presentation because she's under some time constraints.
Yes.
And I know that I want to make sure that we do have time for questions, so we can let you get through the second tool. And I know that there's
Yeah.
good questions.
Well, and again, happy to come back to chat in more detail about the toolkit if you all are interested. So the other resource that we're building that we're also expecting to have later this spring, I think April is the timeframe we're looking at, end of April for the rollout of this, is something we're calling the Municipal Vulnerability Index tool. It's also a requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act and is also being developed with ANR through partnership with the Vermont Climate Council. The intent of the MVI, again, that Municipal Vulnerability Index, is to be a user-guided geospatial mapping tool intended to help municipalities explore and understand vulnerabilities to climate change across a range of social, economic, and biophysical factors. The MVI we're intending will help communities identify where climate change is placing pressures on various sectors, and will help, again, inform municipal planning priorities and project implementation. We're also really seeing it intersect and help with existing planning efforts like writing local hazard mitigation plans, local energy plans, emergency response plans, et cetera. So what you see on the slide here are what we call domains. So 5 domains or groupings of vulnerability indicators that will be displayed in the tool. So where we have geospatial data, and these are examples, will be displayed in the tool. We're using Vermont-specific data where possible and are aligning with other tools like the Social Vulnerability Index. We're pulling in data and information from the Transportation Resilience Planning tool, BioFinder, if you're familiar with that, as well as the Flood Ready Atlas. We're also, and I think this is really what, a lot of this data and information communities can find in tools already. You can get through the Geospatial Data Center in Vermont. I think what's unique is we're also pulling in where we have it data on natural hazards or hazards that will be impacted by climate change. We're aligning those hazards that will be displayed in the tool with the hazards that are identified in the state hazard mitigation plan, so that communities or other partners who are really thinking about hazard mitigation and climate adaptation, if they're looking at the state hazard mitigation plan, they'll be able to explore and see data that aligns with those hazards in this tool as well. The MVI, we're using climate hazard data from local data sets, and then when we have it, climate projections as well, and are incorporating, in some cases, we have to incorporate regional or national data because just local data sets aren't available. I will note Vermont's not alone in lacking in really authoritative peer-reviewed local and state data for climate projections, particularly in a geospatial form. So for some of the climate hazards that we'll have in the tool, we're using downscaled modeling that we've used in the 5th National Climate Assessment, but we are building this tool in the hopes that one day we will have more Vermont-specific climate modeling and data that we can then incorporate into this tool to make it so that we're building it as a way that it can adapt as we get better data on our climate hazards. We're intending this to be a flexible user-guided tool. So if folks are familiar with BioFinder is always the example that I use, but you can sort of go into a map and turn layers on and off and see how they overlay with each other. That's what this tool will be like. It's not going to produce a single vulnerability score, but we are looking at taking some of the factors that will be included in here and looking at a system for flagging to really help identify the presence and scale of vulnerability for particular factors. So your community looking at maybe some of the social or community factors, using a flagging system with various thresholds. It might pop up, you're above the state average for elderly population in our community, and that can have particular implications as you think about high heat days or other vulnerability factors that intersect with natural hazards that are impacted by climate change. We received a draft of the tool, working with a contractor to develop this tool, received a draft of it a week and a half ago. We're beta testing the tool with 7 municipalities, as well as our task groups of members from the Vermont Climate Council this week, and hope to have the tool again complete in April. We're also working to partner with regional planning commissions, as I just noted, to help us train on the tool once complete with municipalities and local partners. That will look like broad trainings as well as municipal profiles or guides that connect the Municipal Vulnerability Index to really how municipalities or local champions can use it for their planning and project implementation work. And my last slide here, wrapping up. So as I said earlier, the Climate Action Office was established to really help support a state vision for climate action. There are a number of projects on our horizon as well that we see as instrumental to helping us collectively better understand the impact that state government is doing on climate resilience, to better and more efficiently provide resources and technical assistance on climate resilience to municipalities, and then also provide information and communication support to decision makers as we grapple with the more severe impacts of climate change. I won't go through them here, but have highlighted some upcoming work on our slide. And we'll note that we see all of this work and coordination with the folks who sit on the Interagency Advisory Board as important standalone tools, but also as building blocks to getting a better understanding of what it takes for our communities and state to be more resilient to climate change. So I'll just close and say that we've been around for a little over a year at the Climate Action Office, have a lot of work ahead of us with partners and with you all, and are excited about providing a space to speak collectively about climate resilience work in the state. Thank you.
Well, we have some time. Thank you so much for that. And I know Representative Lally had raised her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I think that there's a real opportunity to kind of calibrate this technical assistance into the designation program. So that with the laddering that is being promoted with that, so this can be tailored to community need and scale. I work in rural Vermont, and I can tell you that access to this capacity is not constant. I represent Shelburne, a town very much like Representative Pouches. We have enthusiastic volunteers that the Select Board and the Planning Commission can rely on to provide very granular information on these topics. That does not exist in a lot of rural places in Vermont. That capacity, that doesn't mean they don't love their communities, and the potential is there to develop that. The RPCs play a lot of work in providing that technical assistance. That being said, it's very haphazard now. So we have a lot of inconsistent uptake on who plans properly, who does enrolls in the ERAF program, those kinds of things.
Right.
So this would be a huge assistance to the little tiny itty bitty places that were socked by the flooding.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that you brought up sort of the technical assistance and the laddering with the designation reform program. And as I said, we provided some additional funds to ACCD to amend that scope of work to really focus on climate resilience. And so I don't know, I think ACCD was presenting this week on the report that's been finalized. The climate addition to it isn't complete yet, but I think will come out in a couple of weeks. But one of the key recommendations that aligns both with that primary report as well as sort of the climate recommendations is technical assistance, and technical assistance center to really help communities think about how to implement climate resilience strategies in their designation programs. I think one of the things we've talked a lot about with the report and recommendations is a lot of these recommendations aren't specific to designated areas. They're sort of could be implemented or useful for other communities, more rural communities as well, that we don't participate in the designation program. And so that will be included in the report, in the recommendations as well, but appreciate that.
The RPCs are perfectly set up to be the navigators for this. If that model, you know, with the housing can be sort of replicated
Right.
in this instance.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Representative Shaw?
Thank you, and Mary, I think you probably answered my question when we were talking to Representative Lawler. It's the outreach, once the school's ready to go, making sure that every single town in Vermont, big, little, doesn't matter which. So often, I think I see state agencies developing all these really great tools, and they sit on the internet and never go anywhere. A lot of towns don't avail themselves to that. Planning commissions will be a help.
Right.
Individual outreach, and I suppose you have a plan beyond the planning commissions to notify the town, do you?
We do, yeah. I mean, and part of it is actually learning from partners like Andrea with transportation and others who have developed similar tools and done similar outreach on where we can kind of replicate where those efforts were successful. But as I said, yeah, working with RPCs is a key component, but I think reaching out to our other partners like VLCT, reaching out to our constituents and the folks who would sit on the Climate Council that represent municipal governments and others to help make those connections to those partners. But I think partnering with you all as well to do some of that outreach.
And then on slide number 5, series of headlines, it looks like.
Yeah.
Tool is, I hope I have it wrong, is to be able to point municipalities to identify problems. You don't have any solutions.
Well, I don't have all the answers, but I will say, and this is where I think, no, I totally appreciate it. So I think part of in the tool, we have the municipal climate toolkit as well as the municipal vulnerability index. And we've been thinking closely about the pairing of those resources and additional ones that may be developed. Because as for the mapping tool, you'll be able to sort of explore vulnerabilities and say, okay, we know that we have a mobile home park, our mobile home community that's in a floodplain, or we have a pretty high percentage of population that lives in rental housing, and we're concerned about flooding impacts or concerned about drought or wildfire or other climate-related hazards. What can we do about it? And our hope is that we'll be able to connect it to the toolkit that will provide some of those answers and resources to help you get to to answer that question. And I think our place isn't to, right now, we're not providing the exact answer to all these questions, but it's rather connecting folks to the resources. Because a lot of this thinking has been happening, around how do we tackle these particular challenges, and climate change puts a new stress on it, but some of the answers are still the same. And so being able to connect to those resources.
The situation we had years ago, and just kind of, we still have it. The air quality in Vermont, especially from Canadian wildfires, they have a totally different strategy.
Yeah.
Wildfire in Canada than we have in the States.
Right.
So it's going to take, whatever. When you have
Different approaches. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good point.
So this is, Marion, I want to ask you this too, because our committee is a money committee as well as a policy committee. And so I think where a lot of our minds goes like, these are tools, and we identify the problem and maybe an approach. Are there resources within the ANR, the climate, or like what I'm hoping that we can get at through this morning and following up. And I talked with Andrea a little bit about this too, about like how we can help map for our understanding where the resources, both technical assistance, but also financial resources. Because we've all been in communities, or several of us represent smaller communities that we can identify these problems, but how do we pay for them?
Yeah.
And how do we, what are the solutions or the options that we're kind of helping communities come and grapple with? What is, I think, the role of the state in that work? And then where, communities, because I just know from my town that sometimes we can't make those decisions. Like, we want to be able to do that work, but we're balancing a lot of financial pressures. So I would like to be able to get a sense of where are the tools and then where are the resources. Our committee talks a lot about, planning and scoping through, realization. So it's a many-step process. So does the Climate Action Office, are you developing grant programs or within ANR, or And I'm hoping that I know we'll cover some of that with Andrea too, from the V-Trans side of things.
So currently for specific to adaptation and resilience, we're not developing grant programs at this time. Our focus, and again, we're a new office, so I think we're really, and the way I sort of, think about I'm a planner in background, like we sort of have to understand the scope first and really understand the scope of the issue, and then can think about what tools and resources and grant support or technical assistance support to municipalities is needed. I will say, and I think you've maybe already heard from her, my colleague Megan O'Toole is really leading the climate pollution reduction grant implementation. And that will include resources for partners and municipalities, but that's much more focused on greenhouse gas mitigation than it is on adaptation and resilience. So there is some work going through the Climate Action Office to provide financial support to communities and other partners to address climate-related issues, but it's not super specific to adaptation and resilience at this point.
That's helpful. I mean, it's good for us to understand the ecology, right? Like
Right.
the flow. So what I'm hearing, the Climate Action Office within ANR is helping like the tools to identify the problem and to kind of help the planning process. And we
Yes.
know that in different municipalities, there are big planning departments and then there are volunteer driven ones. So this is just, I know this morning we're going to continue because this morning we're hearing from RPCs too. So
Yeah.
I just.
One, two follow-up point. I mean, one, we are sort of have some funds and are thinking about, building off these particular tools. How do we develop resources to think about not developing climate action plans, but rather seeing where planning work that municipalities already do kind of connects into a climate framework. So maybe you have a local energy plan, you have, your transportation element of your comprehensive plan, you have your local hazard mitigation plan. A lot of that sort of, could in theory check the boxes of what would constitute a municipal climate plan, but maybe there's some components that are missing. Are you thinking about economic development? Are you thinking about capital planning? And so we're thinking about providing sort of a framework to help think through that. Now, that's not, again, direct technical assistance, but rather providing sort of, as you said, a little bit of that flow chart to think through the process through a climate lens. And just the other thing I'll say, and I pointed to it in my presentation a bit, but this resilience implementation strategy that was recently announced, one big component and really the first step of that is to get a baseline understanding of what programs and opportunities currently exist out there in state government. And in partnership with the Treasurer's Office, there's also, I think, a focus on financing outside of state government as well. And I think that will really give us, to what you're saying, it sounds like a flow chart or sort of a list of what the programs are, what the resources are. And we'll be working closely on that effort. Again, just starting it, but to get a better baseline understanding of what currently exists, so then we can acknowledge and prioritize how to fill those gaps.
So this is terrific, and I thank you for that. And I know I want to make sure we have time to move through all the. And so this is great. I'm so glad that you were able to make it come back in.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think we're just changing the order a little bit this morning. I think we're going to have to hear from Stephanie Smith next, who's joining us via Zoom. And Stephanie is with the Vermont Emergency Management. So she's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. So very happy to have you here, Stephanie. And I see you have a presentation up on our screen. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And I have a cold, so I apologize if I have to stop and drink my tea so I don't cough at you. I will mute if I have to. And you guys just got really small on my screen. I'm trying to see if I can make you bigger again.
Oh, I know.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think part of what I'll get into is most of what I'm going to talk about today is grant funding. So I think that gets to some of the questions you were just asking.
Terrific.
So hi, good morning. For the record, I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Vermont Emergency Management. And I know the initial impetus behind our conversation in early January was set as, let's hear from ANR about all of this work. And I'm grateful to Secretary Moore for looping me in on that, because my program is very closely tied to all of the folks you heard from earlier in the month, and Marion as well. So we work very well together as a set. It's all very tied in. So great. I manage our hazard mitigation program, and the overarching goal of our program is making Vermont safer and more resilient in the face of climate change and natural hazards. So I just have a couple of slides I'll speak through here. I'll start on the planning side. So I think Marion gave a pretty good primer on the state hazard mitigation plan and how it relates to the climate action plan. which is a continual conversation that we've been having. But on our planning side for the program, we update a state hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. We just received approval for the 2023 version of the plan back in November. So we have a new minted version. And the state hazard mitigation plan, from a high level, it assesses all of the natural hazards that Vermont is vulnerable to, and it proposes a mitigation strategy to improve our resilience and reduce future risk. And as Marion said, it cuts across state government, and it also includes stakeholders from outside of state government, with the focus of trying to bring people together who are doing this work and try to be better coordinated.
And Stephanie, can I just ask you to pause for a quick second?
Yes.
Because I see my committee's looking for the documents. Stephanie's documents are under January 3rd.
Oh.
Okay, so I just wanted to help people. So, sorry, yeah, I could see them looking at that. And then typing madly and taking notes here. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
So-
I apologize. I didn't send it back in, but I just changed the date on the cover. I think that was the
Yeah.
only change. So it's the same
Thank
slides.
you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so then on the funding side, so I'll spend most of my time on this slide talking through our funding programs. So I manage several FEMA-funded grant programs and a state grant program, the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. So on the FEMA side, I'll zoom in on the hazard mitigation grant program for a second. So we receive an allocation under this program whenever we have a federally declared disaster in the state. The amount that's available to us varies depending on the scale of that disaster. We've had at least some funding round open every single year since Tropical Storm Irene. Some of them have been very small. Tropical Storm Irene, for context, was about $34 million in this program. Looking at the July flood, the numbers are still in flux because it's based on the total public assistance and individual assistance amount that's available to us, but it looks like it's going to be upwards of 75 million, maybe closer to 90 million, depending on what comes in under public assistance. So it's a very large pot of money to do infrastructure work within the state. And at the end, I'll show you a couple of examples of the types of projects that we're funding.
And Stephanie, just,
Yeah.
does that money, we hear often with FEMA about the delays, but so is this money, the 75 million, are you able to get that out, or do you have to wait to get it out?
Yes, so the application, so Vermont Emergency Management is the applicant to FEMA, and then the community, usually it's municipalities that are the sub-applicants. So we have to roll everything up and then send it off to FEMA. And then it goes into a little bit of a black void of it's in the FEMA review queue. So depending on their capacity, that can take some time.
Okay, so you're not able to get the money out and know that you're gonna be reimbursed. Everybody's waiting for the approval. Am I understanding that
Yes.
correctly? Okay.
Yes, and FEMA, I'll talk about buyouts. The buyouts in particular, we're sending them as soon as we have them. So we have a couple that have already gone to FEMA. We're not waiting until the end so that we can get them in FEMA's review queue as quickly as possible. But yes, FEMA also, you can't incur any expenses until after the project has been awarded. So you can't do anything until it goes through to FEMA as a project, they award it, and then you can do the project.
Yeah, which is one of the big challenges, I think, that we all face. We have one other question. I see Representative Couch.
Yeah, thank you. So is the funding application, do you go to FEMA and say, here's what we're gonna do? Or do you say, here are the disasters and we get X amount of money from the disasters to do those things?
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be tied to the specific disaster, what we do. So the intent is to do proactive mitigation anywhere in the state. So it doesn't even have to be flood related. We can do some utility resilience work as well, for example. But yeah, so I think I missed part of your question. Sorry. Was there a piece I missed?
The trigger to apply for these grants comes after a declared disaster.
Yes.
But so that opens the door that they'll accept applications. And then, but those projects they are projects that you present don't necessarily have to be in the impacted communities.
Correct. Yes. And it's up to us. So the 75 plus million is for Vermont. So it's not competitive with other states. It's up to us as a state we have an interagency project review committee that includes a couple of regional planning commissions as well, who sets the priorities for what we fund. and determines what goes to FEMA for award. So we're making the decisions about what to prioritize and what gets reviewed by FEMA, but it has to then go through FEMA to get approved.
Thank you.
Great, thank you,
Yeah.
Stephanie.
Yes, and let's see, where did I leave off? So just to give you a sense of what we can fund under this pot, property buyouts are by the numbers, the most projects that we've done since Tropical Storm Irene. So that's one of the things we hit the ground with first, and I can speak more to that. Project scoping activities, so it allows us to develop what we would need to put together a project to send to FEMA for approval. Floodplain restoration work, we have a big focus on getting out of the river's way, giving it more space. Through restoration or dam removals or that sort of type of project. We can also do infrastructure projects like upsizing culverts and bridges that are undersized. We've done a couple of road relocation projects and other transportation resilience. We can do residential property elevations, floodproofing of commercial or municipal buildings, and then things like utility resilience as well. So that's the scope of the space that we're in.
Great.
And sorry, was there a question?
No,
Okay. And so FEMA funding requires under this program, a 25% local match. We have a one-time general fund allocation that will allow us to cover the match specifically for property buyouts. We have about 3 million left in that pot that we can obligate. We had 5 million for this phase of buyouts following the July storms. That gets us to about 50 properties. But we have about the first couple million of that obligated already. And in the governor's budget yesterday, part of what he included was a $12.5 million allocation to provide match for this funding round specifically. So that's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's by far our biggest pot. One other program I'd like to speak to quickly is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Swift Current Program. This is a relatively new program. It was launched by FEMA last fall, and nationally there was $300 million available specifically for states with open disaster declarations. So Vermont is eligible for up to 40 million of that total 300 million. But it's a very specific subset of what's eligible under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So this program is intended to reduce risk to the National Flood Insurance Pool. So it's for properties that have flood insurance and that are either repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, or they were substantially damaged in July. And hold on.
a quick question.
Yeah, just a quick question. How do the buyouts work? Do you sort of subtract the money that an individual might get as far as the insurance and then the items in the house? Just wondering how that payout, how that comes about. And what happens to the property after it's just torn down and there's something in the deed that you can never build back there again?
Yes. So the nice thing that we can do under the program is we can do day before the storm appraisals. So we can, if for properties that were damaged, we can give them 100% of the value from an appraisal as of July 9th. If they weren't damaged, we can do a current market appraisal. So that's also an option. But it's based on that appraisal. We can give them the full amount. And then we've set up a system following July where we can do a state managed program. So Vermont Emergency Management will be the sub-applicant for communities that are interested, but then the community will still end up owning the parcel and they're required to maintain it as open space in perpetuity. But that allows us to manage the funding so we can hire one entity to do all of the appraisals and remove some of that administrative burden from the towns.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have one more question right now on Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you. So Stephanie, previous buyouts that we may have been involved in required 75-25 as currently. However, the 25 also required municipalities to participate and they would end up owning the land and doing all that neat stuff. But anything they did was apply for a 25% match. Any services they provided, any tearing down the house and all that other stuff or buildings or whatever, was all went against the 25%. Is this grant different? Is this just a cash 25% payout to the grantees, which are individuals? Is this different than the previous program?
Yes, so the match funding that we have allows us to do a cash match for the full match. So So we'll cover 25% of the appraisal, 25% of the demo, and then the 25% cash for the property owner. So they'll get the full 100% value, and we
So-
cover all of the costs.
So the towns don't have to do that type of work that they had previously had to do.
Yes, so now we'll be able to, they won't have to each hire their own appraiser, hire their own demolition contractor. We're setting it up so that we can do that from our end, so that they don't have to take on that burden. And I'm hoping it makes it a lot faster once we get projects awarded as well, because we'll already have those contracts procured.
And as I think spoke to Representative Cochran, at the end of the day, the land back to what it was before there were anything becomes part of actually part of the floodway.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we have a couple of questions. I'm gonna, let Representative Bartholomew go first, because
I'm still confused about how much the homeowner gets. I guess you're over here. So if there's a property worth $200,000 and there's $100,000 of damage, do they get the full 200,000 regardless of insurance payouts? And
Oh,
how does it work? And what about contents of the house? How does all of that fit into this?
No, I apologize. I missed part of your question. Yes, so it's the appraisal is based on the day before the storm. If they received, if the appraisal is 200,000 and they received 50,000 from flood insurance, FEMA sees that as a duplication of benefits. So if the money is if they got 50,000 to fix the structure, we would take that out of the buyout. So they would get 150, unless they can show receipts that they used some or all of that to fix their structure. So if they had to fix their heater and put things back so they could live in their house, they will get that money back through the buyout process.
And anything related to contents or just the structure?
It's just, so we don't take out content payments, just structure. So they'll still get the content payments.
all right. I know that there are a lot of questions. I'm concerned about our time, so I'm gonna we want to let you get through some of these slides, and then if there's time, we can get into some other questions.
Okay, thank you. So just one other program I want to speak to quickly is our state program, the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. That's specifically focused on projects, including buyouts that we're not able to do with FEMA funding. One main reason that projects are ineligible for FEMA is that they're outside of the special flood hazard area. I'm so sorry about the coughing and struggling right now. Okay, so the FEMA special flood hazard area maps inundation risk, which is water coming up and spilling out onto a floodplain. But in Vermont, our biggest risk is actually an erosion-based risk, which is water that's moving and dynamic. So our flood risk isn't adequately captured by the FEMA maps, which makes it hard to do some of these projects. So the Flood Resilient Communities Fund was created with ARPA dollars to allow us to fill those gaps in what we can't fund with FEMA. So the total allocation for the program was about 20 million. And our final $3 million was obligated to property buyouts following July in December of 23. So we're currently out of funding in that program.
Do you happen to know if there's a recommend to refill that program?
It's in a couple of bills. It was not in the governor's budget yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think I talked through most of my property buyout points here, so I can skip through that. We have about the first 10 million ready to go to FEMA within the next couple of weeks worth of specifically the property buyouts. And we have a couple that have been submitted so far in Ripton and 2 properties in Hardwick. So those are already in FEMA's review queue. Let's see. Okay, I think I did the buyouts enough. So the other piece I wanted to just give you is a quick overview of some of the projects that we funded following Tropical Storm Irene that held up very well in July. So
Great.
one example is in Northfield. So everything in green with a number was a property buyout. This is an area that was really heavily impacted during Tropical Storm Irene. We were able to do a total of 18 buyouts in the community, but 7 of them all in a row, where the community was able to do a floodplain restoration project, remove fill, and reduce flood risk in the surrounding neighborhood during the July flood. So it lowered flood elevations. And it's a beautiful community asset. It's a park most of the time when the river doesn't need to access it. So this is the sort of thing we're looking to do following the July flood as well, is come up with these strategic areas to do these property buyouts where it can reduce risk more broadly. And a couple of floodplain restoration projects. So again, the focus is removing fill, lowering flood elevations, and giving the river space to slow it down before it gets into our downtown communities where it might be a little more incised, like in Brattleboro. So there's two that we did just upstream on the Whetstone in Brattleboro. One is at Melrose Terrace, which was senior housing. So each of these little black boxes on the left was multiple housing units. Those residents were relocated, and we were able to lower the floodplain elevation so that this vulnerable population wasn't continually having to evacuate during flood events, but it also did a good job at protecting the surrounding neighborhood as well. So this is what it looked like right after it was completed in 2022. And then in December of 2022, we had most of the state, it was a utility disaster, but in Brattleboro, they had flooding. And you can see from the snow line where the water went during this event. And it's that full area, it worked as designed. So it got filled just in the restoration area, but it protected the surrounding area. And again, the vulnerable population who'd lived there was not impacted at all. And then we have another one we're working on just downstream of that, a little closer to Brattleboro. This one's mostly complete. We'll be finishing it in the spring. But again, it's an opportunity to create this beautiful community park, lowers flood elevations, and it slows down the river and gives it space before it gets into downtown Brattleboro. One large infrastructure project I'd like to highlight for you is an overflow culvert that we built in Brandon. So Brandon was very heavily hit during Irene. The water went straight through their downtown. This overflow culvert most of the time is completely empty, like you can see on the bottom right. But during a high flow event, it gives the water another option. So the Neshobe normally goes around Brandon. In a high flow event, the impulse is to go straight through it. This gives it an option where the water can actually go underneath the community instead of over it. So it's been an incredibly successful project and has protected this community multiple times over. And then the last one I'll show you is just upsizing infrastructure. This is a trail bridge in Cambridge. On the top right, you can see the abutments pushing into the river and a much lower bridge. We were able to put in a much larger span. So it's not a constriction point on the river, raising flood elevations in the surrounding neighborhood, and then do restoration work underneath it as well. So I'll stop there. Just a couple of examples of the types of work that we're talking about outside of property buyouts, but happy to take any questions if we still have time.
Yeah, there's still time, and Stephanie, if you want to take down your presentation, then you might be able to see us a little bit better. We can
there we
see
go.
you better. There we go. Okay,
Much
great.
better.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. Just some really great examples of the work that are land-based, that are infrastructure solutions, and so this is great. And Representative Burke of Brattleboro has a question.
Well, more like a comment.
Yeah.
It's very exciting to see these floodplain projects featured here, and I've been watching them very closely. I live right around the corner from the 250 Verge, so I've been able to watch the trucks removing and checking out the progress, and knowing that was a recommendation of the study that the state did right after Tropical Storm Irene. So it's sort of exciting to see how when a state decides, to study something and it doesn't, the plan just doesn't go on the shelf. It moved ahead. Anyway, so and I can see on the map where my house is.
Yeah.
And I know, I just wanted to say that during the July flooding, I think that we attributed the fact that Brattleboro did not have flood damage, just had a little bit, to the Melrose project, and which is a beautiful, beautiful site, and that we were very lucky to escape damage that the communities had. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Representative Campbell has his hand up.
Sure, thank you. Just wondering about the BRIC program, and I understand there was also a grant available, a FEMA grant available for improving building codes to build more resilient structures. And I just wonder, I know there was a question about whether we were going to be able to apply for that, the status of that.
Yes, great question. I didn't speak to it because we just passed the state deadline. So we're submitting BRIC applications to FEMA in February, but it's FEMA's large annual program to do infrastructure projects. And they have a set aside for each state every year. So we have a $2 million set aside, which we've mostly used for planning and scoping activities. This year, there's an additional $2 million set aside specifically for building code activities. So we've been working with fire safety within the Department of Public Safety, and they've put in an application that we're currently reviewing to do an assessment of building codes. So it's about a $1 million total project cost, but it's to assess a residential building code in the state, what it would take to get us there, what it would look like, all of that. So it's a pretty big project. It's exciting. And it's one of the reasons, so outside of that $2 million set aside, the BRIC program is nationally competitive. So we're competing against California and New York and Florida. And one of the requirements for that competitive review is having a statewide residential building code. So currently we're not competitive nationally under that program. But if this is at least an assessment to see what it would take to get us there, and then it would make us more competitive under BRIC if we had those codes.
Great, thank you.
Great. You go ahead, yeah.
So who manages your, like, projects you just showed us? You obviously provided the funding, the grant program, but who does the work and who's in charge?
Yeah, so on the FEMA side, it's almost always the town. For Melrose Terrace, it was Brattleboro Housing Authority because it was their land. They were able to do it. But generally it's almost always the municipality that ends up doing the project.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just one last question, with all of those projects, were they 100% funded through your various programs, or did the towns have to cobble together funding from other resources?
Yeah, it's a good question. So following Tropical Storm Irene, so a lot of the projects here fell into the category like Brandon, where the match actually came through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program. So it's one of the few federal programs, CDBG-DR, that can be used towards FEMA match. And we had a big allocation of it to Commerce and Community Development following Tropical Storm Irene. And that funding, some of that funding was managed by the Two Rivers Ottauquechee Regional Planning Commission to do the buyouts that we couldn't do with FEMA funding, to provide match for property buyouts. And they provided match for some of these other key projects as well. So it depends on the project, but that was the biggest source of match that we had available following Irene. So for a lot of these.
Great, yeah. The match can be the challenge in these big programs. So this is great. And I think it helps our committee understand some of the work going on in other agencies outside of VTrans. So you can stick around this morning. You're welcome to stick around for Andrea Wright, because there might be some questions kind of coming back to you, but you're welcome to stay. But if you have to go, we understand.
I'll stay till 10:30. So,
Okay,
yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much. Thank you. Great. Well, Andrea, thank you for being here.
Yeah, let me see if I can plug in.
Come on, while you're doing that, I'm just gonna, for the committee, we have heard from Andrea about some of the work that VTrans is doing, but it was in a little bit of that packed morning that we had our first day. And so I wanted Andrea to kind of come back, because I think our intention was to hear all of this testimony from Marion and Stephanie and Andrea, kind of like all next to each other. And so we're kind of recreating that today. So if some of the information might be a little bit familiar, but it might allow Andrea to move through it more quickly. And I see, are you having an issue getting on with the
I'm
magic?
wonder if it's just like connection issue at the other end of this, and I don't have a Zoom link.
So why don't, if our committee assistant were to send you a Zoom link now, would you be able to get it?
I think so.
Okay, so for some reason it was working and then.
No, it's usually such an easy committee to come to and plug in. You just plug in, you don't have to get on the.
Maybe it was because of the order that we started things.
I've been known to pull wires
Maybe
out.
while we're doing that,
Uh-oh.
we could just maybe go around and.
Folks, hello, focus.
I just want to introduce Otis Elms Monroe, who is on our team and is focused on resilient stuff. So maybe while we have some downtime, while we connect, if you could get to know you guys.
Do you want to say hello and then we'll introduce ourselves?
so you know our names?
Sure, yes, so as Andrea said, I'm Otis Monroe, I'm the new environmental planning coordinator as of last July. I was the last one to fill out our team. And, my focus primarily is on our resilience projects, resilience programs, which Andrea has talked to all about and continue today. Before that, I worked at the Mount Scottney Regional Commission as their transportation planner for a while, so excellent. So I have that sort of tied into municipal assistance side of things, but yeah, looking forward to getting to know you all.
Great. Well, while we're waiting for the Zoom link to go on, why don't we start, just real quick, you might be in our committee again, so why don't we introduce ourselves? So Representative McCoy, why don't we start just, we're
Patty McCoy, I represent Rutland One, which is Pulteney, Ira, and a little part of Wells, Lake St. Catherine.
Good morning, welcome. Matt Walker from all the way up to Swanton, Sheldon, northwest corner.
Scott Campbell from St. John's. County.
Leonor Dodge from the town of Essex and the city of Essex Junction.
Which represent Pittsburgh and Proctor, southwest.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Coffey. I represent the towns of Guilford and Vernon, which are the southeastern corner of the state.
Tim Corrigan, I represent Bennington.
Kate Lally, I represent Shelburne. Molly Burke, I represent Brattleboro.
Joe Pouch, I represent Heinsberg.
John Bartholomew, Heartland, Windsor, and West Windsor.
Thank you. So I think thank you. Great. Welcome to the committee. Look forward to having you here often, as often as you'd like. So I think we have you up on the screen. I think we have your,
I was disabled screen sharing. So
I think we did. So Jeannie just needs to enable.
I think I've got it.
Yeah. And then I think you just need to turn off your videos. So you're on video on Zoom. I'm terrified to do it on my, there we go, there, and then you should be able to.
Do we go back to the third
January
of
3rd,
January? Okay.
No,
No. We
Because I
just
didn't
got,
find it on.
Andrea,
just sent it last night, so it's a little bit in the day.
there you go.
All right, now let me see if I can find my presentation here so I can look at this. Oh, so many things. Ah. Love it when it works. Move this down.
Great. Folks not finding the.
No,
It's not on the page, but I found it on January 3rd.
that's a different one.
One's
It's a different one, yeah.
Yeah.
This one should have a title page of V-Trans approach to resiliency.
So, for those of us who get printed.
Did I send it
For
last night?
those of us who get printed copies, we have printed copies on our desk. And.
V-Trans approach to.
Yeah, did I send that to you? I thought I did.
So no, we do, like, I think you're here, right? We will follow along with you in your presentation and we'll get that up on our webpage.
Okay.
Okay, everyone okay with that? Okay.
Wonder who I sent it to.
No, that was a different, this is,
These are all the documents that she submitted.
yeah, it's
It's
not
not
there.
there, so-
Yeah, I don't think we have it yet on our communication. Yeah, but we're not. Yeah, so after testimony, maybe you can send
Mhm.
what you have brought as printouts to and send it.
Okay, sorry about that,
That's okay.
but it is here. Good morning, my name is Andrea Wright. I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at V-Trans. And as you all are aware, I'm leading a new group called the Environmental Policy and Sustainability Group. And one of the, it's a very new group. What Otis just said, we're just kind of fully staffed since July. And one of the interesting things about the program focusing on transportation, climate mitigation and adaptation is it's an interesting thing. It's also a challenging thing because we're really overlapping with a lot of different programs that the agency has had established for quite a while. So today I will provide really a high level overview of some of the programs that we administer and roll out to towns for municipal support, but I'm definitely not the authority on them. You'll be hearing from a bunch of the different programs in their budget presentations in the coming days. So encourage you to ask questions then. And then of course, if there's any way we can come back in and provide more clarity on some of the programs that we have, but of course, happy to do that. So you saw this slide in the presentation that I did with the joint meeting for House, Environment and Energy. V-Trans resilience comes through a lot of different channels, and it comes at different stages of what we in Federal Highway refer to as the emergency management life cycle. So that's preparing, responding, recovering, and mitigating. And so, of course, really focusing on sort of that mitigation and everything that we do through our design programs, so that we don't have as much to respond to when we have events. And I'll get into more detail of some of these things. So here at V-Trans, we have a number of different things that we're doing for resilience. Jeremy spoke at the joint meeting. He went over our design standards to build to bank full width, which allows for the stream to have more of a natural environment, and for the river system, for sediment transport, for passing debris, and that all helps for resilience. And when we talk about resilience, we could be talking about a lot of different things. Most of the time when I'm talking about resilience, I'm talking about flood resilience, but that also leads over to, and we've had a little bit of a discussion about it, for like biodiversity and resilience in that aspect. And a lot of what we do for rivers also helps with that biodiversity resilience as well, whether it be for those species within the water or terrestrial passing as well. Let's see, Jeremy also talked about some of the evaluation tools that we have and how we look to design for scour protection. He showed some of those really sort of devastating pictures of washouts, but our structures, actual, the structure itself stayed in place. So a lot less expensive to rebuild in those cases. So certainly looking at scour protection to encourage flood resilient local roads. V-Trans worked with A&R to develop town highway road and bridge standards. And those, if adopted by a municipality, then help them in receiving FEMA public assistance during to recover from an event. So programs at V-Trans that relate to resilience. We've got, of course, it's kind of, we talk about resilience at V-Trans and we're like, where isn't resilience at V-Trans? Because we're looking at our structures program, like our regular design structures program. Of course, that's all about resilience. Our highway design program has a small culvert program. We have small culverts that roll out through our districts in our maintenance division. So there's those, and we also have municipal programs in a number of different ways. So our Municipal Assistance Bureau, who you'll be hearing from later this week also, we have our Transportation Alternatives Program, we have municipal mitigation grants, so that's the Municipal Highway Stormwater Mitigation Grant Program, the Better Roads, the Grants and Aids. Through our districts, we have Town Highway Emergency Grant Programs, Town Highway Structures, Town Highway Class 2. All of these have a connection to resilience and helping municipalities build better so that they don't have to keep building the same thing over and over. Our district staff meet with each town each year, and they really support municipalities in understanding what needs they have. They help guide the municipalities towards solutions. They provide hydraulic analysis and designs for the towns. They help to understand what funding is available to them because it is overwhelming. And then they also work really closely with them in supporting them to get applications in for those funds. Support in the application process, support during construction, and general training and outreach also comes through our Municipal Assistance Bureau. We have staff that go out and help and meet with towns on the ground. We also have our Vermont Local Roads that partner with various entities, certainly at A&R, to provide education and outreach to municipalities. And this is where I just wanted to, was reminded of this just yesterday, this document called Show Me the Money that has all the different grant programs that are available to municipalities. And certainly a lot of them, well, I would say just about all of them have either have a climate nexus, whether it be for mitigation or for adaptation. So just a great resource. Still a lot to go through and to understand when a municipality has this project or this need, where do they go to? What's the best source? What's the easiest way to get the money that they have? And I'll explain a little bit later some of the other ways that we support that. We also have tools. I talked about this a little bit. The Transportation Resilience Planning Tool and the Repeat Damages Tool that we used in our creation and development of the Resilience Improvement Plan. we are looking at resilience in our long-range transportation plan. And then all throughout our different modal plans, whether it's freight or rail or active transportation plans. And there, it all talks about resilience, but we definitely have some work to do to incorporate what we have developed through the resilience improvement plan to incorporate into those other long-range plans a little bit more pointedly. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we coordinate with other agencies. With ANR, we work with the Department of Environmental Conservation through a number of different programs. The Rivers program, a lot of the times it's almost like an extension. The Rivers management engineers are an extension of our staff, certainly during emergencies, but just for our district staff, I would be surprised if there wasn't a district staff person who doesn't have a Rivers management engineer phone number in their on their phones, because they communicate so much. And that really, that relationship really was enhanced after Tropical Storm Irene and the coordination that we did with the ANR's Rivers Management, especially in regards to training VTRAN staff, RPC staff, municipal staff through our Rivers and Roads program, which is a 3-tiered training system that has reached hundreds, maybe thousands, probably thousands of Vermonters and municipalities and people working in this field. So that they can just understand better what the river wants to do, what these natural systems need to do to stay healthy, and to understand how we can work with those systems instead of trying to work against them, which has sort of been a traditional mindset. So I would say our design standards have been improved greatly just from that training and coordination, especially after Tropical Storm Irene. We work with the watershed basin planning staff. We are involved in the development of their basin plans for transportation aspects. And then they were involved as a stakeholder to our resilience improvement plan too. And one of our flags has to do with projects that are identified within their plans. We work with the DEC stormwater program through a bunch of different ways. But for the purpose of today's discussion, really, I'll talk primarily with respect to the municipal roads general permit that they have, collaborating in a number of ways, training and support for municipalities. I mentioned through the Vermont local roads. We serve on a committee, and so do RPCs and other stakeholders when they have permit revisions to do. So we collaborate on those. Right now, there's a research proposal to sort of quantify the resilience benefits. This is something that I think the whole nation, especially with the Protect funding, is sort of looking at. We're looking at that with ANR and their tracking progress for meeting requirements of the climate action plan, but understanding how to sort of quantify what benefits we're getting out of resilience activities. And so there's a proposal to understand the benefits of the MRGP for resilience. So that is something that we're coordinating with ANR on as well. Let's see.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Here, just we're talking, one of the, and it's one of the things that you heard about in the testimony on the first week of the session, just happened coincidentally, he's here in the room too. But just one of the, and we might be diving into this more later this morning, but one of the recommendations was from Chris Campany of the Wyndham Regional Commission, as it touches on the municipal roads general permit program, is that making sure that those requirements are in line with new road maintenance, right? So this is kind of where AOT and ANR, connect. Are you finding that with this collaboration that you're able to do that kind of work?
I'd love to hear more from Chris on that, but I think so. I think the whole point is to support, and I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. The work that we're doing in supporting in a monetary way and a technical assistance way through these programs is to help, and not exclusively because the programs go beyond supporting the MRGP, but yes, it's to help bring those hydrologically connected road segments to the standard that the MRGP calls for.
Okay.
Your copy, give me the clear.
Well, sure. And I can say we do have written testimony from that day, and I don't want to derail, but I think if you wanted to offer something right now.
What I was talking about were the new municipal road maintenance realities and these constant flood events, because
when MRDP was first envisioned, it wasn't picturing like, especially in our region, the rest of the states had what we had in 2021.
Yeah.
But where it's storm after storm after storm.
Mhm.
And the towns can't do just regular summer maintenance like they used to. It's almost like a continuation of, in terms of level of effort, like perpetual response, like during the winter, spring, just constantly has to fix the problems. And just want to make sure that MRDP expectations keep up with these new realities of like, are they even having time to get in there and do the work on those segments while they're still actually trying to put the roads and bridges and culverts back together. So that was the issue. Sorry if I left you long.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think this is the whole point of this morning is to kind of just making sure that, you know, even if it's just connecting up the conversations, that like we're the program design and the realities on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, for our towns to address resiliency. So that's really, yeah, since you're raising it here, I just thought I would ask the question about what is the process for updating some of these programs, and is there enough funding for them?
Yeah, I again would defer to, you'll probably hear more about that from the RPCs. There certainly is a capacity issue within our own agency to get funds out. I think we have some capacity to do a little bit more, and Joel can speak to that more when he talks about his budget, and because we have been talking about what these programs could handle in a monetary sense and how we could get that out. If municipalities can handle more resources thrown at them as well. So then, yeah, okay, yeah, we talked about that. With the Climate Action Office, you know, I heard from Marion earlier, we support the Climate Action Plan. I am serving as the co-chair of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee right now. So we have a presence there, really playing a role as facilitator there because there's so many people on that committee that are experts in different areas of resilience, but bringing the transportation lens for sure. Otis also sits on that committee. We are looking at actions in the Climate Action Plan. We were certainly part of that with the Vermont Climate Council and developing what rural resilience adaptation recommendations and strategies and actions would be. Marion mentioned really quickly this morning the Interagency Advisory Board to the Climate Action Office. So we serve on that, ensuring that actions that we're doing throughout state government are, you know, additive and complementary and not redundant or conflicting, and to understand how we can how what we are doing does support the CAP already and what we could do more to support the CAP in a concerted way. And then, oh yeah, I already mentioned the training. So moving on to sort of our coordination with Vermont Emergency Management. Stephanie mentioned a committee that reviews grants applications. We serve on that committee to represent transportation perspective on applications. You know, for the hazard mitigation, the BRIC, the flood resilient communities funds, those programs. And we're just looking for opportunities to collaborate with VEM to understand their programs as much as we can and to make sure that any funding and programs that we're rolling out, again, are complementary to that and can support each other. They were an important stakeholder. We were on their steering committee for the rewrite of the state hazard mitigation plan, certainly learned a lot through that process. And they too were a stakeholder to our resilience improvement plan development process and helped with our project prioritization. Through that plan, we have a number of FEMA funded projects. So that gives us an opportunity to do resilience projects with municipalities and regional planning commissions and other local entities. We've got one on the Whetstone Brook in Brattleboro, a pre-disaster mitigation grant. We've got hazard mitigation grant application in for doing sort of a natural treatment system fix along Route 117 in Jericho, a problem area for, we've had multiple washouts in that area where the Millbrook comes into the Winooski. We've got one on 108 that we're working with the Regional Planning Commission on. And we have the BRIC, Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities in a scoping project for the Bridge 308 Railroad Bridge in Barry that we're working on.
That's okay. Anyway, we're gonna, we recently heard from Representative Anthony of Berry City.
Yeah.
So there were two different projects.
Yeah, there are two different projects, one
Yeah.
proposed.
So this is the one we talked, that's the project that we talked about last session.
Yeah.
Great, okay.
We should be meeting with the town to present our alternatives and a recommendation within the next couple of weeks. We're waiting for some final documentation from our consultant. Mhm. And then the RPCs, for the Transportation Resilience and Planning Tool, we just finished last year rolling that out statewide. And then this year had a really huge outreach effort with all of the regional planning commissions and having them help us round up municipalities and different organizations to learn more about the tool and see how it can help them do planning. We reached over a couple hundred attendees in all the 17 sessions that we rolled out. We also rolled out, we trained our internal staff and also A&R staff and different entities throughout government on that. We are working with the RPCs. We kept them abreast and had input from them on our development of the Resilience Improvement Plan and identification of projects. And now that we have sort of that prioritized list, our next step is to go to them and understand what more we can be doing to support municipalities with some of those prioritized locations. We have a transportation planning initiative where we provide funding to RPCs to assist municipalities in a variety of different ways. Support for the municipal roads general permit and just resilience are two of the tasks outlined in that plan. So they have specific responsibilities and they report to us on what they're doing for supporting municipalities in those two areas. And then I have a couple more slides about sort of actions called out in the climate action plan and the state hazard mitigation plan, but just wanted to pause there to see if there was any questions on those programs or that collaboration that we have with other entities before getting into those. Any questions? And I know we're supposed to wrap up at 10:30, so.
We got started a little late. We'll go 5 minutes late. So you don't have to speak too fast. We built in a little bit.
Okay. So this, like I said, the next few slides just sort of outline some of the resilience actions called for in the climate action plan and the state hazard mitigation plan and our response to them. One of them was to create a transportation flood resilience program to meet the requirements and related funding that are anticipated to be part of the 2021 reauthorization of the Federal Transportation Act. And so that has to do a lot with PROTECT. And of course, we have our resilience improvement plan, and we're aligning projects with our capital program improvements right now. And then, looking at PROTECT funding, the discretionary grants that are available as well to help us sort of target some of those areas that aren't aligning with our capital program. So we're working with that. We're looking one of the actions was improve road drainage around lakes, ponds to reduce stormwater runoff and erosion, especially on municipal roads. So that certainly has to do with our funding through the Better Roads, the grants and aids and municipal stormwater grants that we have. Another was to complete the flood vulnerability assessment of all bridges, culverts, and road segments. So that speaks to the transportation resilience planning tool. And then of course, our continuation and use of that tool through our development of the resilience improvement plan. One of the other actions called for was to incorporate resilience into our transportation planning and project development process. So we do have as one of the criteria in our prioritization system for projects is resilience, and we have sort of worked with our asset management bureau to understand how we can modify that from the criteria that we're in it to update it so that it is more in line with our methodology developed for the resilience improvement plan. Invest transportation funding in improving flood resilience and aquatic and terrestrial connectivity. So I spoke to that a little bit before, how what we're doing with our bridge standards and widening our structures for natural stream flow also helps with terrestrial and aquatic connectivity. So we have all those design standards. We have a grant that we just received from Federal Highway for a wildlife crossing grant so we've got, I can't remember, just a little over $1 million to further scope and design a wildlife crossing in Waterbury. We have a discretionary grant application for Protect In that is certainly about resilience, and that's why it's an application through the Protect program, but it also is working in elements to protect, to help a protected species get from one side of the road to the other. We have a project in Searsburg that we upgraded considerably for black bears. And then we have a project in, I can't remember which haven, but one of the havens, I think West Haven, for rattlesnake crossing that we're partnering with the Nature Conservancy. They own land on either side of the road that we're upgrading there, and we're providing means for them to go under the road instead of over the road, or want to use the road instead. For the state hazard mitigation plan, definitely a little bit duplicative of some of the actions called for, intentionally duplicative of some of the actions called for in the climate action plan as well. So yeah, looking at, what our transportation resilience planning tool can do, incorporating resilience into project selection, identifying funding and working with VEM for our Protect funds and our FEMA grant mitigation. We talked about the buyouts too, and I forgot to mention it, but through our involvement with the grants review committee, we're looking at when there is a buyout, if a municipality is not interested in taking over ownership of that land and it is an asset, could be seen as an asset to our infrastructure. So if there's a buyout close to a bridge and it would benefit the infrastructure to have that capacity of the land around it to kind of absorb some of the storm flow, working with them and the possibilities. We haven't embarked on any of those yet, but we have talked with a couple of different entities about the possibility of taking ownership of some of that land in cases where the municipality might not want to. I think really that's about all I wanted to cover.
This is great, Andrea. I mean, I think I just want to, this is a huge amount of work, but it's agency wide. And I think it's really helpful for the committee to see that work. But I think, I know I had conversations with members of the committee before the start of the session, and the July floods are right. We're all thinking so much about that and how we can best support our communities and our state in doing this work. So this is really helpful to see all the programs and especially hearing about this before we kind of dive into the budget, because we know there are programs and then funding. And so, I think we have a bill in our committee that is H 693 that is focusing on looking to solve that problem in part. Like what are the programs, the funding and the infrastructure, and what already exists and what can we, what have we learned that works well, but where are the gaps? So I think that's some of the work that we're looking to do this session, the first half of the session. So this is really helpful. And I think, I hope the committee finds it helpful. I know it's helpful for me in understanding how all the beginning to understand like really how the pieces fit together across agencies. So
and we're definitely will be providing some comment on their proposal, and that will definitely speak to sort of some of the avenues and some of the funding sources, and not making projects that are programs that are working well now with state funds, not making them too complicated with federal funds, sort of the ones that are a little bit more easily accessible to towns because of the simplicity that they offer. Whether or not we could up some of the levels of funding in different categories. Those are things that I'm working with Joel on in response to that.
Right. Because we know, just to emphasize, I mean, I think your comment is well taken, because when federal dollars require a lot more on the part of the municipality. It comes with a lot more different compliance, reporting, et cetera. So I appreciate that. So looking forward to working with the agency to hearing what we can do best there. So, and this is a great setup for what we're going to continue to do this morning. If you're able to stick around, love to have you in the room if you're able to.
Yep.
Because we're going to hear from the regional planning commissions, which are the entities that are working closely with so many of our communities to do a lot of this work. So,
Yeah.
so great. So thank you so much. And thank you, Stephanie, for joining us and Marion who had to head out. But this is, I think, a great setup, and we might need to follow up with you individually or small groups if people have questions, because there's a lot of information that was just shared with us. So, so with that, I think we're running a few minutes behind, but if we could come back at 10 to 11, and we'll start up with the next round of testimony.